morning, everyone. So good to see you. Hopefully you have had a wonderful week. My name is Charlie Carroll. I'm the founding pastor here at City Church, where our purpose is to help people experience the fullness of God's love through relationship. What a task, what an opportunity, right? All at the same time. Welcome to those of you that are tuning in from all over the world via Facebook. We're happy that you are here with us this morning. We're kicking off a new series in the book of Ruth entitled Hesed, which is a Hebrew word that we're going to talk about today, about just the loyalty, the loyal love of Jesus. And so I want you to just see this. This is very important, that life is happening for me, or in me, for me, through me, no matter what. That the life of God is happening in me, for me, through me, no matter what. And the reason why this is important is because just like the book of Ruth, we will find ourselves at varying times throughout our life where we have a lot of reason to question whether or not life is actually happening in us and for us. But the way that God designed everything was that not only would life be in you, but it would be working for you and through you. And last but not least, this is the way that God works in the world. It's very important to understand that though God uses things like rain and other natural elements to communicate to his creation, he primarily works through you and me and us. And so this is important because when we fail to see ourselves as agents of light, life, and love and look for other people to do it, a lot of people end up being hurt and left untouched or unmoved. We are the people that have been given the opportunity to carry and to share and to spread the life of God in us and through us to the world around us. So you're important. And no matter what you're going through or where you're at right now, it's really important to understand and acknowledge that life is happening in you, even though you don't feel like it. It's actually working for you. I was with my grandmother last night, who this past week had to have emergency open heart surgery. And she is getting ready to turn 90 this year. And when you have open heart surgery at 90 years old, and at one point in time, they had to do CPR on her, which really hurt her ribs and broke some of her ribs. And so she's in a lot of pain. And I was talking to her in the hospital last night and just trying to help her understand that life is still happening for her, even though she doesn't feel like it, even though she is in an excruciating amount of pain, that life is still happening in her and for her. And when we realize that, we can step into our God-given role of sharing the light, life, and love of God with others. That being said, we are kicking off this new series in the book of Ruth that is based off of this idea of loving loyalty and God's commitment to us. You can turn, if you have your Bibles, to Ruth 1, or I'm going to read it for us. Just want to remind you of some quotes that I gave you last time I was up here. These are both from Richard Rohr. He said, "We do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking." And this is important for the church in the day and age in which we live. If you really look closely at the Old Testament, you can see that this has always been the way that God has wanted things to work. And it's why he started off by making a covenant with Abraham. And the first thing he asked Abraham to do was literally move his feet. When God wanted to move Abraham's faith, he moved his feet. He did the same thing for Joseph. He did the same thing for Esther. He did the same thing for Moses. He did the same thing for his son. When God wants to move your faith, he moves your feet. And this is going to be a reoccurring theme over the next several months that you hear from up here and through this organization that is known or has been known as a church. We are going to start communicating as soon as next week some major changes around here that are all designed toward moving our feet. There has never been a larger group of people that have dealt with more disappointment than the North American church over the last 25 to 30 years. And that's because we've accidentally divorced ourselves from the way Jesus did things and really sat back and tried to believe from a distance. You can't believe from a distance. If you want to grow your faith or move your faith forward, you're going to have to move your feet. And so Richard Rohr is a pastor, and he said this, and it's so true, that we don't think ourselves into new ways of living. We live our way into new ways of thinking. And then last but not least, and I'm sharing these with you because these quotes are going to be very evident throughout the book of Ruth. Last quote, faith is not for overcoming obstacles, right? Think about wherever you are right now, whatever you're up against, whatever scares you. Your faith is not for overcoming obstacles, it is for experiencing them all the way through. Believing that God is in this with you. That even though it might be painful or even though it might not seem like it could be a story that God is in or working through, that God is still in you, working for you and through you to reach the world around you. And I just, whatever makes you unique this morning, whether it's looking at a fingerprint or touching your face or listening to the sound of your voice, it's important that every person here in this room and every person that is listening from wherever you're listening this morning, that you acknowledge that you are unique, that there's not another one like you, which means God has a very specific purpose to work in you and for you and through you to reach the world around you. And for me, I believe that is the biggest act of faith, to believe that you are actually that important, that God does see you each and every day, that he knows your name and he knows where you're at and he knows what you're up against and he knows your whole story. He has watched you try. He's watched you try to get over some of the things that you've tried to get over and you haven't gotten over them yet. He's watched you win. He's watched you struggle. All of those things. He's very familiar with how many times you've tried a certain something, thinking that it would help this time and it is yet to help. Like, God knows all of those things. And he is still very, very, very committed to you. And it's just important to understand that and to acknowledge just how unique of an individual you are, and also how unique it is to have the God of this world be individually committed to you and your growth and your progress. And so it's never too late. And even if you've been following the Lord for 50 years now, or maybe 5 months, it's important to understand that we know far less than there is to know. Even if you've known the Lord and studied the Lord full time for 50 years, you know way less than what you actually know now, because that's just the way it is when it comes to an infinite subject. Sound good? These are behaviors we're going to see in the book of Ruth, as Ruth and her mother-in-law Naomi move their feet from one place to the other. We'll start in Ruth 1, verse 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they are Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there." Verse 3, "But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the first was Opah, and the name of the second was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband." Undercover Boss, I don't know if you've seen it. It's still on. It came out in 2010. I think it's an interesting show where they'll take companies that have a number of employees, so many employees that most of them do not know who the boss or who the founder of the company is. And they will take this boss and they will dress them to be just like an entry-level employee. And the owner of this company will, like I've seen the one with Domino's, where the CEO of Domino's goes in to just apply for a job and work on the ground level. And the idea is just that the person that is in charge will become familiar with what's going on in their business, which reminds me of some of the work our family security consulting firm has done, starting all the way back in the early 80s, where we would train someone to know how to investigate and see what was going on in the company. And then we would let them go work for a big company like Coca-Cola or Walmart, and they would go through their training process. And for 6 months, they would just learn their job at big companies that I probably shouldn't name. And the purpose was just to be working behind the scenes, to get deep, deep down into any specific situation, to learn what was going on. And I put this in here for a reason, because as we look at the book of Ruth, we are going to see that this is the very characteristic of redemption in our lives and throughout the world. That no matter where we go or what people group we're interacting with or where it is on this planet, that redemption is always at work. God trying to reunite his creation and the people that are made in his image to him to experience more life. And so I use the idea of undercover because most of the time our life is going so fast and our world is spinning so much that it can be very easy to not realize that redemption is there with us and on the scene, though we might not feel like it. And so really, if you just do an assessment this morning with your right hand and put it on your heart for me, go ahead and give yourself permission just to feel all of the things that you're going through, the excitement, the fear, the curiosity, the anxiety, the depression. Just as your heart beats, do an assessment with your hand, all of the things that are there. And see, what tends to happen is one of the last things that we think about or are aware of is that redemption is there too. Even in those feelings that make you uncomfortable or scare you, those questions that have yet to be unanswered or look like they will be answered in a way that is going to hurt or disappoint you. That redemption is always there. I wrote here that redemption doesn't sleep. You need sleep. Redemption and the grace of God does not sleep. It's always working, always. It precedes us and it exceeds us. That redemption was working before we came on the scene, and redemption will continue to work when our breath is no longer connected to our bodies. There's not a problem. This is really important. There's not a problem, place, or people group where redemption is not working right now. You know, I have a friend whose family has really pioneered the news industry in this country over the last 100 years. And when we talk about the nature of the business, one of the things that we talk about is just like what gets views or what people see or want to hear about. And unfortunately, it tends to be the bad things that get more attention than the good things. And this is true in our own life, that we're very quick to see all that is not going well or that is yet to be fixed. But the truth of the matter is redemption is still working. It tends to be undercover at times. And the Lord does this on purpose. That often redemption has to work in an undercover capacity because if it was too overt, we might try to stop it because we don't always feel like what God is doing is the best thing for us. Did you catch that? That often God has to have redemption serve in more of a plain clothes type of role in our life because we would work against it if we always recognized it. That when the Lord is working for you, it doesn't always feel that way. That with faith being the most precious thing, our faith, our sense of trust being the most precious thing to God, sometimes he has to work around us because we are the ones that would stop his great plan for our life. This is why we're told that his ways are not our ways. And when you want to get into measuring that, just how different his ways are than our ways, you need to measure the distance from earth to heaven, which is a pretty significant distance. And so often redemption has to work in an undercover capacity, but the truth of the matter is not only do we need to realize that and acknowledge that, especially when we don't feel like God is near, he's always near. Redemption is always working. Redemption is always trying to pull us toward what is ideal, what is God's plan for our life. And we've really messed this idea of God's plan for our life up, in the sense that we think it's maybe wearing some goofy outfit somewhere, being a missionary, which I'm not against missionaries by any means. But the truth of the matter is, like, God's plan for your life is one that will blow your mind. God's plan for your life is what you were made for, and he's trying to grow you into it. And that's why he's always trying to speak to us, whether it's indirectly through creation and other people, or directly as we open up the Word and spend time slowing our mind down and meditating. God is always trying to grow you into this big plan that he has for you. And he's going to need you to be big and have broad shoulders and go through it in order to wear it, because it's that great. You're not born ready for excellence and greatness. You have to trust the Lord, and that's why we see through stories like Ruth that people that are used by the Lord and actually get to like click into place, get to snap into the plan that God made for them long before they were born, are people that had to go through it. Their feet had to move in order for their faith to grow. And so don't ever be upset about God allowing you to be sold into slavery by your brothers or the people that you care most about, because the story will end. The story will end with you saying, this wasn't your fault. This was God's dealing. And he set me and us up for greatness. So the first idea is that you just need to suspect and know that redemption is working even when it's behind the scenes. Number two, you need to shut up. When it comes to other people and wondering why they're not as great as you are, when they're not as consistent as you are, when they don't do all of the or make all of the great choices that you make. Redemption is always working, and your criticism is going to slow them down when it comes to realizing that God's really working in their life too. And maybe they're just set back. Maybe they're just dealing with things that you didn't have to deal with. Maybe their heaviness is heavier than your heaviness, and you're just ahead because your heaviness wasn't as heavy as theirs. And so when it comes to redemption and it's always working, quit criticizing people. You're going to see throughout the book of Ruth that God works with the people we often don't suspect he's working with. Why? Because redemption's always working. In every problem, every people group, every place, redemption's always working. I think it's Romans 14 that says, who are you to judge another person's servant? Every single person belongs to the Lord. And when the Lord wants to correct them or wants to move them in a different direction, he's going to do it. And so what you can do is you can look at other people's problems, and if you don't think you're dealing with that problem, just celebrate the fact that you're not as stupid as they are. Right? Something about saying that to the Lord, that you're grateful for not being as stupid as they are, that might just kind of set you on track. Probably should share some of the message. Write this down. This is what I want you to walk away with. If you walk away with nothing else, you'll win. God's commitment is rooted in his character, not ours. God's commitment is rooted in his character, not ours. I'm sorry that someone accidentally convinced you that God's commitment to you is rooted in your ability to perform. This invisible energy that we know very little about compared to what we can know, that we call God, somehow, some way is committed to you. And that's why he made you, and that's why you're here. You've heard it said that there are accidental parents, but there are no accidental children. If you're here, you were supposed to be here, even though you were told that maybe you were an accident. There are no accidental children. There are only accidental parents. And so you're here for a reason. And the God of this universe that made and created everything is committed to you. And that commitment is rooted in his character and who he is, not who you are or what you can do or what you cannot do. And so if you've made mistakes and someone has convinced you that God's not as committed to you because of your mistakes, I apologize on their behalf. They just didn't know any better. They could have started off by reading their Bible to see that the people that knew God the best in and throughout Scripture tended to be the people that made the most mistakes. I have the word compassionate here because this is this Hebrew word Hesed, which we'll talk about as the series goes on. And it's just the idea of God's loving loyalty. That God's compassionate commitment to you is rooted in his character, not yours. And before you get all up in arms, especially if you're a performance-driven person that likes to earn everything that's given to you, you need to understand that you don't want God's commitment to be based on your ability to do what you say you're going to do, what you think you can do. You want his commitment to you to be rooted in his loving loyalty to you. And this is really interesting. In parenting, in coaching, in teaching, it's really a challenge to help someone understand that your commitment to them is rooted and grounded in love versus performance. My daughter, who's 10, started soccer this week for the first time. If you don't know, I spent my life playing soccer and played it for a little bit for a living. And so I've been through all of the stages, and I've purposely kept my children away from soccer unless they wanted to do it. You probably understand that as well. But we got to go to the soccer store and just like pick out shin guards and a ball and socks and all of that good stuff. And, you know, when I think about her and her desire to play soccer now, like my commitment to her, to helping her, is a loving loyalty thing. It's not an obligation. And too many of us have been introduced to an idea of love that is rooted and grounded in a contract or some sort of performance. If you do this, I'll do this, versus a compassionate commitment or loving loyalty like we see in the Lord. It is so beautiful when you can be loved out of desire versus obligation. And that's what we have been invited into. When we say that God is working in us and for us, through us, this is how he works in the world. What we're talking about is becoming people who love people because we see it as an opportunity, not an obligation. It's a problem if you have to be talked into interacting with those who are financially poor. It's a problem. Jesus moved throughout the earth while he was here, not because he had a duty to do in pleasing the Father or to fulfill a role. He did it because he was passionate about people. And so a healthy faith is one that moves toward people because we can't help it. We actually see the grace and the mercy that has been given to us, and so we move to people because we recognize that before we were loved, or before we loved, he loved us. So God's compassionate commitment is rooted and grounded in his character, not ours. A couple of things here. Ruth, the book of Ruth, has these different theological truths, one of which is the name Yahweh, and how often you're going to see the word Lord, which is the Hebrew word for Yahweh. And I just want you to know when you hear the name Yahweh, which is a name for God, that it's emphasizing the active force of God in the lives of his people. That God is not just someone that sits up in heaven disconnected, but he is present. And that's why we say redemption is always working. Like God is present and committed, compassionately committed to his people, and he is actively working at all times, even when we do not feel it. God is actively working. And often we miss it because we don't expect it. Someone will say, and actually, I feel like I've heard you say this, Mal, and I meant to start off and just recognize Mallory and the effort over the last 2 weeks, the messages that she had and the Lord gave to her to share with us. So wonderful. Thank you. But I think I've heard you say before, when you are looking at cars, because maybe your lease is coming up or you're needing a new one, and you look at a certain car, now all of a sudden, that's the car you see on the road everywhere. And it's like, how are there so many of these? And this is true when it comes to God working in our own life. We often do not see God at work because we don't expect God to be at work. We don't feel worthy of God being active in the garden when we are in our garden, or active at school when we are at school, or active on the field when we are on the field. Like, God is actively committed to you, and he is where you are. If you want to know if God is at, whatever business down the street, you just need to know if someone is there. If someone is there, God is there. And so the name Yahweh is just like the essential nature of God, where God is present and active, working in the lives of his people. Interesting thought, everyone is made in the image of God, and then we have an opportunity to become adopted through the sacrifice of Jesus and the sealing of the Spirit. But God steps outside of time, and so sometimes people have yet to step into their adoption and their son or daughtership, but yet they still, when God looks at them, are a son or daughter, though they have not yet stepped into that very role yet. A couple of other things. Hesed, again, I've already mentioned this idea of loving loyalty, that God is not obligated to you. He is passionate about you. That it is not an obligation. God working in your life and jumping in your car with you in the morning is not an obligation. It is an extreme passion. We see this idea of loving loyalty all throughout the book of Ruth. When Ruth loses her husband and then her two sons, she asks God that he would show Hesed, that he would show loving loyalty to her daughter-in-laws. Boaz, who is a Hebrew landowner and businessman, affirms that it's loving loyalty that Ruth picks him and stays with him versus a younger man the way she could have. And I hope this has happened to you, where contractually speaking or practically speaking, you did not think that you were going to be the recipient of love, and yet this loving loyalty, the loving loyalty of God, showed up and was beside you or walked with you through that situation. That loving loyalty is what life is all about. Feeling and experiencing love when you do not expect it. And this is the truth of the matter when it comes to God. God is extremely committed to you, and he is compassionately committed to you. He invented the idea of grace and mercy and forgiveness and justification by faith and the imputed righteousness of Christ, so you could quit worrying about trying to earn his love and favor, and instead live your life knowing that he is compassionately committed to you. He is radically committed to you. God is radically committed to you. On your worst day, with your biggest mistake, redemption is still working, and God is radically committed to you. How would that change your life? How would it change the way you live and walk out your days if you knew that God was compassionately committed to you? This 6-hour and 47-minute trip, I think I probably did it a little faster than that. Back in 1999, January of 99, I wanted to go check out the Brownsville revival that was happening up there in Pensacola, and I lived in Sarasota or the Bradenton area, and decided I would just get in the car and go, and I did, and got to be a part of that environment, which was really wild. And I was so excited, I knew I was not going to sleep. And so I just jumped in the car at like 11:30 at night and decided I would come back from Pensacola to Bradenton. And again, it was January, and it was cold, I think, up in the Panhandle. It was like 30 degrees at the time, which was not super normal. But I just had jeans and a T-shirt on, traveling light in those days. And as I got about an hour outside of Pensacola on the way back to Bradenton there on I-10, I kept getting off the highway to get gas, and they were closed. This was like country bumpkin land. And I started praying because I was getting nervous that I was going to run out of gas. And sure enough, I did. And I was on only time in my life that I've ran out of gas, which I probably deserve to run out of gas more than one time. And I ran out of gas, and I'm sitting on the side of the highway, and I had a cell phone that was about the size of a basketball back then. And I called AAA, and they're trying to put me through to a number of people. And so I finally get a hold of someone. I'm like, I'm kind of cold. It's 30 degrees. I've got a T-shirt. Like, I'm at mile marker 80. And they said, okay, well, we'll send someone. So, like, an hour goes by, and I'm really cold. And the tow truck driver calls me, and he's like, hey, I'm not far from you. Where are you? Like, what mile marker? I'm like, I'm at 80. And he's like, oh, they told me 8. They told me that you're at mile marker 8. I'm like, no, I'm at 80. He's like, okay, well, call him back. This is a true story. So I call him back, and it's like a big cable company here in Southwest Ohio that I will not name, that you just have to start the whole process over again when you call them back. You know what I mean? Like, you could have spent like 3/4 of the month on the phone with these people, and like, you got to start all over. It doesn't matter. And so sure enough, I call back, and it's in the middle of the night now, and they can't get a hold of anyone. And like, I get frustrated, so someone hangs up on me, and then I have to call back and start all over. And my phone is flashing that it's about to die. And, back in those days, you can't charge your phone in your car. And I called back, and I'm like, listen, I'm getting ready. My phone's getting ready to die. I potentially am going to die. I'm at mile marker 80. 80. Like, you've got to send someone for me. And basically they tell me, like, it's not going to happen. So my phone dies. And I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, like, how's this going to go down? Like, do I get out and walk? Or do I stay in my car and, like, try to bundle up and see if I can survive till morning? And sure enough, Mr. Tow Truck Driver from mile marker 8 shows up about 45 minutes later. And he said, I knew that those people would not be able to send anyone for you, so I just told my boss I was going to roll and come find you. And it's the idea, yeah, it's the idea of loving loyalty. That he said to me, I figured that if you were my child, this is what I would want someone to do for you, to just come. And even though I knew they weren't going to send anybody, it still was in the back of my mind that maybe they would send someone, you would not even be here, but I wanted to come anyways. And this is true when it comes to the Lord. Like, the Lord's going to drive those extra 72 miles to get to you, even though he doesn't have to. Even though you don't deserve it all the time. God's going to keep coming. He knows what you need. He's compassionately committed to you. A couple of things. When we look at the book of Ruth, it's only 4 chapters, first 5 verses. It opens up with, in the days when the judges ruled. If you haven't studied this, you wouldn't know that is like writing to an audience to remember a very specific time in history. It's in the days when the judges ruled. Like, everybody remember that? That's what's happening here. That Israel at that time was ruled by committee, and like any committee that rules anything, it just doesn't go well. And so there were a lot of bad decisions, and the country was falling away from their history and flirting with different gods, and there was apostasy, and the people that were ruling were making decisions for themselves, and it was just a nightmare. And yet the book of Ruth happens within this context. Just this idea that even when it feels like everything is falling apart, redemption is still working. That it's actually in the darkest of environments that redemption shines the brightest. It's actually in the worst case scenario where Hesed can be felt or seen the best. And so if you're tempted to think that you're beyond God's reach, or that you've gone too far, or that God doesn't see you, you need to understand that it is in the darkest of environments. It is the darkest of days that grace and forgiveness and love and Hesed, God's loving loyalty, shines the brightest. So if I'm God, and I want to show what loving loyalty looks like, I don't go into an environment where everything's great. Redemption's there too. But I go into the environments where darkness has started to try to overtake or overcome the light. And see, this is true on a macro level, but it's also true on a micro level in your own life. There's probably a lot that you have going on that's right. There are still some things that are hidden and buried that God's committed to. And sometimes you feel the rumbling and the uneasiness of God putting you through or allowing you to be in a certain environment where those things are exposed. And He's allowing you to go there and be there and to stumble into that situation because He's trying to expose some of the remaining dark places in your life. And it's not punishment, it's love. He's not afraid of your shortcomings. He's not afraid of your bad decisions. He's not afraid of your mistakes. He's not afraid of your fears. He's actually very committed to them. And if grace, mercy, forgiveness, the imputed righteousness of Christ, justification, all of those things exist to forgive what you have already done or what you will do before you even knew you were going to do those things, then we all should be able to take a step back and relax because now it's all just about redemption. There was a famine in the land, and I'll keep this brief. And then Elimelech, this gentleman in Bethlehem, which is a very significant city when it comes to the history of this Jesus movement. It's where Jesus was born. This is thousands of years before. I love what reading the narrative or when reading Scripture that we can see thousands of years at a time. And so where my crazy mind goes is to looking up at the stars in Bethlehem on the night that Jesus is born, and the wise men are almost to the place that Joseph and Mary and Jesus were. And to think that all in one picture, God could see what was going on in Bethlehem thousands of years before, about 1,000 years before, maybe 1,500 years before, when Ruth is in Moab and she is brought to Bethlehem because she loses her husband, and she's a Moabite. She was not to be included, or should not by Jewish law have been included in the genealogy of Jesus. But all of these things are working thousands of years beforehand so that Jesus can be born at the right place, at the right time, to the right people, in order for God to fulfill His word and His compassionate commitment to mankind. And so the truth of the matter is, you're going to get to experience today, and then throughout the rest of your life, some of God's compassionate commitment to you that's been working already for thousands of years. And there are options and actions that you have an opportunity to execute on today with the prompting of the Spirit that will ripple on and continue on for thousands of years after you if God does not come back. But what I think of is, Elimelech leaves Bethlehem to go to Moab. There was a famine in the land, and that doesn't scare us because we can go buy a bean burrito for 99 cents and all of our hunger is met. Most of us can, not all of us. But we don't really think of famine as being a scary thing. In those days when there was a famine, it scared you, and you thought about your children and your grandchildren and your neighbors and everyone around you. It was a big deal. And so, interesting, Bethlehem and Judah is where the Hebrew people were to stay. They were not to migrate or go out of that into a land where people who served other gods were. And so Elimelech takes his wife Naomi, and they leave because they hear in Moab, which is about 50 miles away, so from here to Cincinnati, they hear that there's no famine, that there's food there. And it's interesting that Elimelech goes, and then Mahlon and Chilion, his sons, also pass. Jewish tradition, and that's what this is, Jewish tradition thinks that the three men pass because they wandered out of God's territory into foreign territory when they were told not to, or when they knew that they weren't. And I don't know if that's the case or not. It's fun to study like Jewish history and what they think was going on there. But there is a principle for us to learn. And that is this. When you are where God wants you to be, it wouldn't be surprising for a famine to arise in that land. Because if God's committed to your faith, he knows that it's going to take weight and resistance and adversity in order to grow you. And so maybe instead of leaving where you are right now, maybe you need to think about embracing whatever is heavy and weighing you down and viewing it as a gift to you from God to develop you and grow your faith versus thinking how you can get on the next bus out of town to get out from under the prescribed pressure that God custom engineered for you to get things out of you that won't serve you long term. It's called Hesed. So let's quit trying to run from everything that's painful and everything that's hard and instead lean into it, embracing that God has orchestrated and allowed these things in order for it to grow us. Wherever you go, you're going to take your problems with you. And so let's embrace where we are with all of the feelings that we have, knowing that the answer is not over there. The answer is right where we are, because redemption is always working. Write this down. God's commitment is rooted in his character, not ours. Last but not least, Moab. God tells Abraham to leave Ur. That's where he was from, right? Abraham's the father of our faith. He's the person that God came to and said, I'm going to make a covenant with you, right? I'm going to be committed to you, be committed to me. And Abraham obeys, and he leaves, and he goes south. And see, here's the thing. You can leave where you're at when God tells you to leave, and when you leave, you'll be blessed. That's the difference between Elimelech and Abraham. Abraham left something that was comfortable because God told him to, and going to what was uncomfortable, he was blessed because he was supposed to be there. Elimelech left what was uncomfortable to try to go to something that was comfortable and ended up losing his life, and his family had to return back to where the prescribed soil was. When Abraham is in the midst of being so blessed, his nephew, Lot, goes to Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's a disaster, and a lot of people end up losing their lives there. And Lot's daughter ends up sleeping with him in order to have kids because she doesn't want to be a disgrace. And so Lot's two daughters sleep with him in order to have children. Well, the oldest daughter, her firstborn, is the founder of the Moabites. Not the kind of history that you want to think of when it comes to the lineage of Jesus. Yet, Ruth comes back as a Moabite to Bethlehem, ends up getting pregnant, and has the father of King David as her son. King David's grandmother is Ruth, a Moabite. Pretty wild to see that God is serious about this idea of loving loyalty, that it's not the people that deserve his loving loyalty that he ends up working through as much as the people that we often think are disqualified from being recipients of his loving loyalty. We see what a disgrace. We think, ooh, disgusting. Ooh, how could they do that? And God says, there's a perfect candidate for my loving loyalty. I'm after them. Because see, when we have it all together and there's no need for grace, redemption doesn't shine that bright. But when you're imperfect and you barely know which way is out or up, and you're making mistake after mistake, God's compassionate commitment and loving loyalty shines bright. 4 non-Israelite women are mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. It's beautiful. God working in the people and in the places we do not suspect. Here we go, and then we'll close and reflect. God's compassionate commitment is rooted in his character, not ours. Lord, would you help us out? Would you take these words and plant them where they need to be planted in our heart? And thank you for forgiveness. We just tell you that we're not going to live or walk in fear, that we'll be light and loose, trusting that you've gone before us, and that your compassionate commitment and redemption is working in us, for us, through us, to reach the world around us. Amen. All right, we're going to take a few minutes just to reflect, 2 minutes. Lord, what are you saying to me? And what am I going to do about it? What are you saying to me, and what am I going to do about it? Then we'll close.
Hi, guys. Did you miss me? Who wants to talk about feelings now? It's good to have Charlie back, of course. I was thinking when he was talking about redemption and just the dark, dark places where we are, how like the Lord is still present and redemption is still there and he's still working. And the camera in our daughter's room, we now have a nightlight in there, which serves all of us. But prior to that, it would be pitch black when we would put Evie to bed, and it is hilarious to watch on the camera, like if Darren is putting her to bed and I'm watching, because to him it is black, like you cannot see anything. But to me, there's night vision on the camera, and so he's like walking like this and like trying to like find where everything is, and to me it's like super obvious. I'm like, why is he acting like he is a blind man? But he feels blind, and that is what I think of when I was listening to this message. It's like sometimes like you just feel like you cannot see where your foot is going to hit in the next step. And when we zoom out or when we look through the lens of redemption, it's like, God's right there. There's night vision. He's taking care of it. It's not as scary or hard or bad as we think it is, but it feels like we feel so helpless in the midst of it all. So think of night vision next time you feel like you have no idea where you are or where you're going. Okay, a couple of announcements before we dismiss. We have initiatives to sign up for. 2 out of 3, you can sign up for them. Sorry if you want to taste and see, but it's full. A lot of people are tasting and seeing. But you can go running, which is probably healthier physically for you than the bourbon one. And then meeting in the park. So you can go to our website, citychurchdayton.com/initiatives, and sign up for an initiative. Speaking of initiatives, we're already talking about May. So if you are an owner here at City Church and you are already doing something, whatever it is, running or drinking bourbon or going to the park, whatever it is, we just ask that you invite us into it and let us be a part of it. So you can go to our website to submit the initiative that you will lead in May. Prayer night, we will be here on Wednesday, as we are every Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Bring your kids. We have childcare where they can just like run around, whatever. We're going to pray. So Wednesday, 7, we end right at 8. We're very conscious of the time, so it's an hour long. You can join us any week. All right, breakouts. These are the breakouts. So it's a new month, so we have new breakouts. You can stay in here for a conversation about the message that Charlie just preached, so you can ask questions and just kind of hear a discussion going deeper into the sermon. Out in where you got your coffee, we're talking about the Enneagram this month. So the Enneagram, more than a number. So you can learn more about what the Enneagram is, what your number is, how to interact with yourself and others in light of that. And then the Message 100, going through the Bible, the Message 100 Bible. Today we're talking rebuilt worship, restored identity. So like kind of vague, but super interesting. You walked through the core values room to go to worship this morning. So that's where that breakout is. We will take 9 minutes to get to your breakout. They start right at 10:30. Not right at 10:30, that's a lie. They start around 10:30. So grab another coffee, use the restroom, go to your breakout, and have a wonderful rest of your morning. See ya.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for participating in our conversation with your comments and your questions. As always, we would love it if you would share the link to today's message. If you need anything, you want to know more about who we are, you can visit our website at citychurchdayton.com or send us an email to info@citychurchdayton.com. Have a great week.